Hi, I'm Maura Tersmanovich, and this is my professional journal article. I read Developing Summarizing Skills in Fourth Grade Students, Intervention Program Effects. It was a 2018 study, and it was held in Slovenia. It was an intervention program that lasted for 5 months, and they did it in 8 primary schools with 190 fourth graders. The teachers had 1 day of training, but they also received 3 different workshops that taught them how to work with the students with this specific strategy. And the students had a total of 19 hours of training. The purpose of the study was to see if they could teach a special summarizing strategy that would improve student scores. Studies show that the use of summarizing strategy affects reading comprehension, and through reading comprehension, also students' learning achievement in both very young and older students. The intervention was taught and practiced for 5 months. There were 114 students from fourth grade. 5 teachers were involved. The EG students are the students that did have the new strategy, and they were taught macro rules. And I'll explain that on the next slide. 76 other students from the 4 other schools, referred to as the CG students, were just taught using their mandatory curriculum. The researchers were trying to determine if the students trained with the new strategy would have higher scores. And they were scored right after they were taught the strategy, and then they were taught 3 months later to see if they still had the improvement. The researchers explained that when reading, we read most important statements, and they're the macro structures. Then we also read statements with more details, and then statements with the most details. Those are microstructures. These rules were proposed by Kinch and Van Dyke, and they suggested that there's 3 processes that are important to summarizing, and that's deletion, generalization, and integration. Pre-tests were given for these students, so they did a reading test of reading fluency and comprehension and a vocabulary test, and that measured the size of the student's vocabulary. And that is called the GRC, the General Reading Competency. They combined all those scores. And then the MKR is the Metacognitive Knowledge about reading, and they adapted a version of the Metacognitive Knowledge questionnaire to get those results. Summarizing skills were also tested for a baseline score. All the students in the study, when they were pre-tested, were all very similar in their scores. The results taken from the study proved that the EG students did improve significantly in summarizing compared to the CG students, those peers. The second testing 3 months later, though, proved that the EG students couldn't keep up the advantage that they had over the other students. They're not sure, the researchers aren't sure if the EG students didn't have enough training or that they weren't able to transfer their knowledge when they got into the 5th grade. They also did say that when they did give the test 3 months later, when the students were in 5th grades, they didn't say, hey, remember everything you learned last year in the 4th grade and try to use those techniques. They didn't say anything like that, and they wonder if that had something to do with it too. My reflection is that in addition to teaching multisensory reading, I also spend time teaching comprehension strategies to my students. And that's why I wanted to read this article. I was hoping I'd find out something that would really help me. Um, Summarizing is particularly difficult for my students. And so with these students in this study, they were all like typical students, like general ed students. And they still forgot what they learned by the time they got to 5th grade. Or if they weren't prompted, they wouldn't use those strategies. So that just makes me think, with students who are struggling readers or have specific learning disabilities, how can we expect them to remember everything that was taught and to apply everything that was taught on a daily basis without prompting? Like, I have to prompt my students all the time. I'm sure you have to prompt your students as well. So when if general ed students need that kind of prompting, and if 5 months of doing this strategy isn't enough to make it something that they do automatically, how do we expect any struggling student, regardless of subject, to be able to actually apply what they've learned? So it just gives credence that we have to use repetition, and we have to constantly like prompt our students and continue to work with our students over and over on the same skills. So hopefully I'll learn more when I read more articles on this, and I'll let you know if I find anything good. Here are my references, and thanks for listening.